Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast, connecting the opaque world of food startups.
Hey guys, when I was preparing for this episode today, the interview is just really interesting because this is probably the first time we've had a 9-figure company. I mean, he's taken multiple companies from zero to over $100-200 million revenue per year. And those are just huge numbers, especially if you're just starting out and you're like, how do you get there? So my focus today was to hear his story and see if he could give us some advice. What are things that you need to be doing now to scale if you're trying to get that large of a company and have that much of an impact? A lot of times a 9-figure company is going to have a lot of impact by sheer numbers, and they reach a lot of people. So, I was really paying attention and trying to figure out for myself, what does this guy do? He has a really, you can tell he's a hustler. He's and I mean that in a good way. The terms kind of changed over the years. He's a serial entrepreneur, if you will. And I'm really excited to share this with you guys, and hopefully you guys can learn as much as I did. Thank you so much, and enjoy the show. Okay, today, as we mentioned, we are in episode 61 with a food technology company that has created a new process using gourmet fungi, mushrooms, that transform agricultural products through a fermentation process to improve taste, value, and health. This could be coffee, chocolate, tea, rice and grains, or as they mentioned at the Food Bite Summit, lemonade. And they naturally enhance them, improve the taste, but in a healthy way, not like artificial sweeteners or any of those other nasty processes that we'll learn more about in today's show. Now, the founder, the CEO, he has successfully co-founded several companies, including Scale Computing, which he grew from inception to $100 million in valuation. He has also successfully grown a startup from zero to $200 million per year, delivering a $1.1 billion return on a $40 million investment. Alan Hahn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this morning.
Yeah. And Alan, listen, we've had some larger companies, some, 8-figure companies on the podcast, but we've also had, university startups 21 to 22. Later on in the episode, I want to go into those numbers a little bit more because for someone that's listening to our show that's just starting out, a 1.1 billion return, that's an inconceivable number. But before we go there, Alan, you've done a lot of things in your life. You are in Aurora, Colorado right now, but give us a personal background. Who is Alan Hahn?
Well, Alan Hahn's a serial entrepreneur. I've been into technology for all of my career. Started in the high-tech area of focusing on transforming technology for business purposes, and then moved into the technology of improving foods.
Alan, sorry, 1 second. I just want to interrupt here because I want to go back even further.
Yes.
Even to your childhood and college. I'm curious, what experiences, what happened in your childhood that made you become what drives you to be a serial entrepreneur?
I got you. What really drives me is, my childhood was all about science. My dad was a scientist. We had labs in our homes since before I could walk. So it was always a lot of curiosity on how to mix chemicals together. It was very cool as a kid to be able to mix a couple chemicals together and get something to smoke or pop or have some very interesting experience with. Some were ones you won't forget, like blowing up a beaker or something like that. But it was really about being able to be curious about things, take things apart, put it back together, try to make it better, and being creative. Always we're looking to, how to improve things. And that's continued to this day is, how do you make things better? Why do they work that way? And what could I do different? So from very young, I had exposure to a lot of science that probably most people don't have. And I think that's lasted a lifetime.
Now, Alan, a question for you. We're going to get into your personal background with diabetes in a minute. But
yes.
Okay, I've always been interested. So I'm a I guess you could say I'm now a lifelong student of nutrition. I've read nutrition textbooks. I understand a high level of what, antioxidants do. I know why to avoid sugar, et cetera, et cetera. But a question for you, how would someone, if they wanted to apply concepts from chemistry to nutrition, I guess what I mean to say is like to go a deeper level, how would you recommend to someone that's interested in chemistry with an application to understanding nutrition better?
I think the first thing people need to do is go take some nutrition classes like I did and start with a basic understanding. I think most people haven't been through that experience and learned from a basic level what happens when you consume a carbohydrate or you consume anything. What does your body do with it? How does it process it? How does it impact you? And I think that's a really important place to start.
Well, Alan, a question for you, just to put you on the spot here, because I've been talking for some products that we sell, carbohydrates and, percentage sugar. I understand, carbohydrates, it's talking about the element carbon, correct? How do we understand carbohydrates and how they function in our body?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is that all food turns to sugar to provide energy to the body. When you consume something, it's going to turn to sugar, and your body's going to sense that sugar in your blood, and you're going to create insulin in the response to that sugar, and that insulin is going to scoop up that sugar and feed it to your body as an energy source. And what you need to know is that having too much sugar at any one time in your body is very rough on the body to handle, particularly when you become a type 2 like myself. So what you need to do is understand the glycemic load and the glycemic index of individual foods. So you have to understand at the rate in which things turn to sugar. So carbohydrates turn to sugar very fast, fats turn very slow. And protein is in between. So you take a look at this and you try to develop meals that have a balanced glycemic load that has a overall slower transition to sugar and thus make it easier on your body to consume and also gives you a chance to burn it off. If your body consumes a lot of sugar at one time, it has to store it as fat. It doesn't have an opportunity to burn it.
And okay, interesting. And so for low glycemic index, like the glycemic index, what I understand is it's a nice starting point. It may not be the end all be all, but for certain fruits, right? It's really interesting because like if there's a lot of fiber in the fruit, the fiber can sometimes slow down this glycemic loading, correct?
Correct. But what you want to do is eat balanced. You really want, when you have any meal, you really want to have a balance of carbohydrates, protein, and fats. And you want protein to be the largest amount, carbohydrates much less, and fats about the same as the carbohydrates. That way you get a glycemic load that your body can easily support. And you're far better off to eat more than 3 meals a day. Going to, twice that, 6 or 7 meals a day is much easier. Eating smaller amounts, giving your body a chance to process it is far better than sitting down to a big meal and overwhelming your system.
Gotcha. And Alan, I mentioned this to you before we started. I've read some studies from Berkeley, and I'm not going to pretend that I understand the science behind it, but a lot of people say that I don't say a lot of people say, but there's a study from Berkeley, and I'll link to it, that says take all the foods you're eating in 1 year, right? Pretend you could put this on a gigantic plate. If you just put in there 8 24-hour periods where you're not eating, just like create this space, that it's so much better for your health. Do you know anything about fasting?
Well, just what I've read. I don't fast because for my type 2 diabetes, I have issues with fasting. So I avoid fasting.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're still learning about fasting, I guess, as much as I am.
Yeah. I've heard if you fast, it's helpful to you. If you keep yourself at some level of hunger that you don't fully satisfy yourself, it's supposed to extend life as well. There's a lot of different research that's been done on it. But again, with my type 2 diabetes, fasting has a negative impact.
Gotcha. Okay. So fasting, not for everybody, especially if you're a type 2 diabetes. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give you an example. Is like when I wake up in the morning, my blood sugar is spiking and I haven't eaten anything in 8 hours plus. So fasting is, again, for certain type 2s, it's not a good thing.
Gotcha. Well, Alan, so just kind of moving on to forming Mycotech, right? That I guess it was inspired by your diabetes and learning about health and nutrition and changes you made. I wanted to go back though, before you got there, when you go from inception to $100 million valuation, or you also talked about a 1.1 billion return on a $40 million investment. You've been, I guess, a co-founder and a leader on these projects. How does that happen? I mean, to me, these numbers are so large, and I think to a lot of listeners as well. What are the keys to doing that? Is it the system, the process, sales, marketing? I mean, please enlighten us.
Yeah, it really starts with people. The most important thing to do in creating a startup is get the right team in place. Without the right team, nothing else matters. And it's the most important thing, because if you have the right team, you've got the ability to overcome obstacles that get in your way of whatever the business is. And you need people with different skill sets than you have, so you have a broad range of skill sets. I find, you usually need anywhere from 4 to 8 people to kick off a company and have enough bandwidth there to really be successful. So, that's the most critical. The next most critical thing, that you're serving a big market. Markets have to be of great size, because you're only going to get a small percentage of it. And if you're getting a small percentage of a small market, it's meaningless. You'll never take off. So market size is really important. And that next is innovation. You have to be able to innovate and think differently than the norm. Having another, product just like someone else's doesn't mean anything, but having a different approach, the opposite approach of what the industry is doing and other players are doing, are the key to success.
Gotcha. And so choosing a market, right people are the top two. And Alan, can you tell me, because I imagine you went through plenty, as a serial entrepreneur, you're used to solving problems and going through plenty of speed bumps. All right, so Scale Computing or any of the other previous companies, did you ever have to change your business model midway? Because I know it's very famous, like Twitter with podcasting. They used to be a podcast company, and Twitter, what we know Twitter today, is kind of a side project. Did you ever have to make a big shift to your company?
All of them.
All of them. Okay, there you go. So
all of them. It's the classic, because it's a discovery process. The idea of starting a company from scratch and having all the answers in day one or year one is not realistic. It's a discovery. You're going through figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and you'll have aha moments, and you learn to turn right, turn left, do a backflip, whatever you need to do in order to create value in your company that other people are interested in and are willing to embrace. And, same here at Mycotechnology. We started out processing rice with our fungi to make a great vegetarian meal. But that's a small market. When we started really looking at it, what else could we do? Coffee is the second largest traded commodity in the world. Why not start there? Because if you get a small percentage of that, that's a big company. And so you have to think about your technology and how it can be applied different ways into different markets in order to achieve financial success.
So I'm going to make a metaphor here, right, with what you're saying. Market size is so important. Now, a lot of startups that have been on the podcast, Back to the Roots being one of them, it's just there's limited grocery space. So you want to, or shelf space. You want to get more space. You start with one SKU, one product. You add a line. All of a sudden, you have 4 or 5. It could potentially be 4 to 5 times sales.
Correct.
Perfect. Now, here's a question I have for you, and I've actually gotten some emails about this. And as I always have to say, I'm not a lawyer, but I have a very small company, Alan, but even as we're growing, slowly but surely, we've been a $1 billion company just made an opposition to one of our trademarks. And I guess what I'm aiming at is, well, one, I wanted to see if you ever had trademark issues, but 2, in the United States landscape, is it inevitable that there's lawsuits or, as you grow, that you're going to be getting lawsuits and you're going to need tons and tons of legal advice to get a 9-figure or 10-figure company?
So the answer to it is no, I've never had a trademark issue. I always file trademarks and, go through the method of, getting your trademark approved. So I've not had that issue, but you will always have lawsuits in companies. But there's other areas that you use legal advice. So if you create intellectual property and you want to file patents, you need legal help there. If you're successful and you're interacting with companies and they want to buy your products, you're negotiating contracts. So you have that there. And you have HR, you're hiring more people and you need to have employment agreements and things like that. All of this adds up to where your legal is going to represent in the top 5 expenses for your company. And I have found that across the board, barring lawsuits or anything like that, but just the day-to-day business requires a significant amount of legal help.
Now, Alan, I want to go dive in again to your expertise here. Now, here's the problem for a startup. Legal advice, it's not cheap. So I guess there's certain things that, you can maybe do yourself and certain things for the lawyers. Do you have any things that you can learn from where this, you always need a lawyer, like employment agreements, but maybe a certain thing as you're starting out, you could use a template from LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer. Do you have any insight there?
Yeah, I don't like using those. I rather pay an attorney to create a template that's custom to my business for, say, the standard contract. You're going to buy my coffee as an example. I would pay an attorney to create that for me and in a template form that I can rinse and repeat, use it over and over again without engaging the attorney. So I like to create those standard templates and put the money in to get those templates suited to my company. I'm sure LegalZoom is, fine way to do it, but I just found I like that customization to my business.
I gotcha. Yeah. So I recently, for an operating agreement for a new company that I formed with a partner, we went the expensive route, and we could have used a custom template, but we're trying to grow this into a large company. So we kind of figured it's worth the extra $2,000 or, however much more it costs, because for something that important, we would hate 4 to 5 years ago because we made I don't want to say lazy, but just a generic agreement that has some holes in it could cause, some really costly problems. Perfect. Okay. So Alan, I want to move on a little bit to your company right now. It's amazing. If you guys go to the website, listeners, it's Myco, M-Y-C-O, Tech Corp, CORP.com. And they do so many things. Private labeling for coffee, green tea, grains, tea, stevia. They can also just sell, I guess, I'll call the mushroom kit. I know that's maybe not the right way you guys would say it, but you know what I'm getting at, right? In layman's terms, for decreasing bitterness. I want to figure out here, I feel like education is big. Let's just say, I don't know, let's take an example for coffee. Let's say Dunkin' Donuts coffee. How would you pitch me? How would you explain to me? Like, why would I, especially Dunkin' Donuts coffee? I'm sure they get like 100 companies every day trying to sell them either coffee or et cetera, right? How do you get in front of these people?
Yeah. Well, one, we know a lot of people and we get introductions to companies on a regular basis. But really the angle on coffee, if you think about it, coffee's a commodity, its pricing is based on a commodity supply and demand. But there's other aspects that impact coffee because not all coffee is the same. Tastes different. Each location has different soils and environmental issues that make things a brighter coffee or a more robust coffee or, whatever and one of the big factors to make coffee that impacts the price of coffee is bitterness. A less bitter coffee is typically more valuable than a more bitter coffee. So what we do with our technology, we can remove molecules through the interaction of the fungi that have been sensitized to, there's about 7 different molecules that we target in coffee to reduce those anywhere from 55 to 75%. So to make the coffee taste better. So you can take lower grade, say Arabica or a Robusta, transform that by making it less bitter. And now you have a totally different tasting coffee that doesn't require the consumer, if they typically put cream and sugar in it, to put cream and sugar in it. They, of course, can if they like that flavor, but it's not due to the bitterness. The value to a roaster, say as Dunkin' Donuts, as you mentioned, would be that they could use lower grade Arabica as an example and make it taste like a higher grade coffee and either lower their cost to their customers or to increase their margins.
Perfect. Okay. I understand completely. It's power of incentives. Like I love, I'm sure you're familiar with Charlie Munger, and he just talks about the psychological biases, and he's like, incentive is number one. And my favorite example, right? Those are incentives for sales, right? To Dunkin' Donuts, you can sell coffee at a higher price, have higher quality, et cetera, et cetera. And an example that always stood out to me was with FedEx. I don't know if they invested in FedEx or they had something to do with FedEx, where the overnight shift, which was like a consolidation center in Tennessee, a logistics center, they had to unpack certain trucks and planes and reload them. And it was a huge problem, and they were paying them by the hour. But they said as soon as they changed it to payment per shift, it's 3 a.m. As soon as you finish it, you can go home. All their problems disappeared.
Why, of course.
Of course, right? No. So I love incentives, and it's interesting, Alan. You're way more experienced and have way more success than I do, but I read a lot of books and just talking to people. I think it's really important as you read and study and meet people. Like, for me, the power of incentives, I love to see it in interviews and podcasts and books and in real life. And it's good to hammer these things into your brain. So it's not just reading one time about the power of incentives, how important it is, always appeal to self-interest. But when you've seen it 1,000 times, it becomes part of your nature. And I'm sure you have that already from all your experience. Alan, I want to finish this interview because you've done a great job here. It's great having someone of your level here. But I want to ask you a question, something that I'd like to know. Let's say when you got up to $200 million per year with one of your companies or a 1.1 billion return, you're a serial entrepreneur. So you keep going and going, you keep solving problems. But I mean, how do you celebrate? How do you feel when that happens? Because I'm sure like when you're starting out, you think about how it would feel and it probably feels a little bit different than you imagine. But tell us how like the experience when you figured out you had a 9-figure company.
That's a great question because I think it's really important, particularly for an entrepreneur and everybody involved in the early stage companies, is to celebrate the successes. Because if you don't, you're just getting a grind of growing the business, and you need to take a breather and set some goals of when you achieve certain milestones to take a breather, and celebrate it. So I'll give you a great example. In my first company that we got the $1.1 billion return on, we had set milestones to celebrate when we hit 30 million, when we hit 100 million, and when we hit 200 million as examples. And what was interesting, when we hit the 100 million mark, we were growing so fast we didn't get to have our celebration until we were already at 120. So, but it's really important. And we had, T-shirts made up and rulers made up of different things on it that talked about the milestones we've achieved and let people know how much you appreciate their efforts to take a company to that kind of level of success. Because it's hard. It's hard work. It's dedication.
I imagine. It's interesting because it's a milestone, and it's funny if you're not an entrepreneur, like a lot of people say, it's about keeping, like the money is about keeping score. I know what drives you is not really the money, but it's still a nice milestone to celebrate, if that makes sense. Like it's not about seeing the number. Like you wouldn't feel fulfilled doing, I don't know, some type of business that doesn't add value, although it's pretty hard to add value, honestly, and have a company valued at $1 billion. But I think the point stands. So Alan, listen, for listeners that we mentioned your website, and I'll link that online. I encourage everyone to download the white papers and get on their list just to learn about this. And, any companies that are interested that listen to my podcast, if you need a personal introduction to Alan, please shoot me an email. But Alan, if anyone wants to contact you directly, how can they reach you?
Well, one, they can just send me an email at alan@mycotechcorp.com, and I'll be glad to communicate with them.
Perfect. Okay. Well, Alan, thank you so much for coming on today. I think you gave us a great perspective of kind of high level business building that we haven't had before. So I really appreciate it. It was great learning about all that stuff, plus the nutrition. So I'm really honored to have you. And maybe you can come back in the future once Mycotech takes on the growth curve of your previous companies.
Well, that sounds good. And Matt, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.